Farmers today are facing rising costs, volatile markets, and extreme weather. The A Better Way to Farm podcast digs into strategies to help you take control of farm inputs and maximize profit so your farm can thrive for generations. Remember to take advantage of our free resources at abetterwaytofarm.com. Now, from America's Heartland, here's your host.
And here we are in August, and what are we talking about? The headline reads, crops versus diseases. I've been seeing this in a lot of different places. Today I'm coming out of AgWeb from Farm Journal, and they're talking about the fact that the headline story was that Minnesota is going to have a record corn crop if they can outpace southern rust and tar spot. And it's interesting to see all the things they attribute this to and all the things that we do. They talked about being in Iowa, and it's the same thing. They were facing tremendous disease pressure, great crop if it can outrun the disease. Again, we're seeing southern rust and tar spot in a lot of different fields. As a matter of fact, in nearly every field they sampled it, they said one of them wasn't really too bad. And so when that's the highlight of your deal, that is probably not exactly what you're looking for. We'd kind of like to do a little better than that. And then they get to talking about that they said, well, you know, the weather, it just kind of jogged between two extremes. We had drought, we had flooding for most of the season. And I think, guys, that kind of just sums up farming. We live in southeast Iowa. Our soil is shallow. We don't have a lot of great organic matter. We can't hold on to a lot of moisture. And I tell everyone, they say, describe where you live. And I say, well, here's the deal. We are 10 days from a drought, and I can be standing in a rain when I tell you that. And that's exactly how it works. But the fact of the matter is, Chip Flory was quoted as saying, but foliar diseases rearing up in Iowa fields have the potential to put the kibosh on record yields between now and harvest. He was the host of the lead scout on the western leg of the tour. And so we just keep running across these things over and over and over again. So guys, here's what I want to talk about. I go back over the last several years, and we've had people, I got friends down in southern Illinois, and you know, they were way too wet early, then they turned off way too dry. We've had people who said, man, we lost stuff. We had standing water. It looked like a lake out here part of the time, and then it turned off too dry. And now they're battling, worried about, you know, kind of a light drought kind of a deals. And we know that stress is always going to take yield away. That's the reality. The more stress we have, the more yield we give up. The yield potential that we have is tremendous. We know that. However, yield potential and recognized yield can be very, very far apart. You know, yield potential, I don't know, 700 bushel, probably plus, would seem to be the accepted norm right now, what people think we can do. And yet here we are, if Minnesota gets a 202, it'll be the biggest yield they've ever had. It's going to be a fantastic yield, but there's more on the table. And so what we want to do is talk here a little bit about all of this that we face. And we face it every single year. Here where I'm at, we haven't had a lot of problems with tar spot up until this year. We had a little break last year. The 3 years before, it was so hot and so dry that hardly anything was living in the way of a fungal type aggravation. And so we didn't have to put up with that. However, that doesn't change the fact that we need to be prepared. And I think that is the gist of my podcast today. We appreciate you guys tuning in. So enjoy getting to share with you guys. But in today's session here, I just want to talk fundamentals, because here's what I know about 26. At some point in time in 26, more than likely, wherever you are, it's going to be too wet. And sometime in 26, no matter where you are, it's going to be too hot. And at some point in time, it may very well be too cool. And then all of a sudden we get these things, they say, well, it was cool early and then it got hot, and then we had all these things show up. I was in a field yesterday and they had some of the pollination trouble, you know, and we're all wanting to say, well, that's just a hybrid, that's just a company, we're going to blame it on them. It's never going to happen again. And I did do some reading from different agronomists, and they were talking about the fact that they wonder about that tight tassel wrap. Could that be nutrient related? You say, well, we've never had it before. I'm not saying that the environment didn't play into it, because it did. I'm not saying that certain genetics are not more prone to having a problem, because they are. Okay, we know that. What I am saying is that maybe it's time that we come at this thing with a total systems approach. You know, the fact is we have been applying NPK, lots of N, lots of P, lots of K for a really long time. But guys, where they do the right thing, good things happen. On my desk pad, sitting right over there in red ink, it says it is never wrong to do the right thing. That never comes back to bite us. Taking a shortcut, that comes back to bite us. Doing it wrong when we knew it was wrong, that comes back to bite us. Doing it wrong when we didn't even know any better, it still comes back to bite us. And the fact is, we can do better. Why do we want to wait and see, okay, maybe it was too wet this year, we had a lot of moisture, and so that brought us a lot of diseases. Maybe it was too hot and it was too dry and we had a lot of stress and that creamed our yield. Maybe this happened, maybe that happened, but what if we go with a total systems approach? I just grabbed a page out of the fertilizer handbook here. Just happened to be something that I was looking at as I was getting prepared to record this session today. And it's on nutrient interactions. And I'm just going to read to you for just a second here. Optimum growth usually occurs within a limited range of plant nutrient concentration, so it is important to maintain levels of available nutrients within that range through proper soil management and fertilizer practices. High levels of one nutrient in the soil may depress uptake of another to the point that the latter nutrient becomes the limiting factor in plant growth. Some examples are excess copper will adversely affect iron nutrition. Iron and manganese or zinc and iron are antagonistic to each other. Sidebar, what does that mean? That means when you have too much of one, it's at the expense of not letting the other into the plant. We know that here on our own farm, our iron levels are through the roof, and we have a real problem getting enough manganese into that plant. We have to address that or we end up in trouble. Back to reading out of this. Phosphorus. High levels of phosphorus may induce zinc deficiency on low zinc soils. And I would tell you that our experience indicates high phosphorus induces a zinc deficiency consistently. I don't care what the zinc levels are. We see plant tissue that is always depressed, it's always deficient in that zinc when the phosphorus is too high. Potassium and calcium. High levels of potassium and calcium depress the boron and the magnesium absorption. Going conversely to the other way, it talks about that nitrogen will usually enhance the uptake and utilization of all macronutrients up to a point. Then we use too much nitrogen, and now all of a sudden it reduces the uptake of the other plants. We know that when we overuse nitrogen, we have to overuse potassium or we're going to be in trouble. We know that the proper magnesium may increase phosphorus uptake. So let's think about that for a minute. We know that when our potassium levels get too high, we induce a magnesium deficiency. We have to apply magnesium. If we don't, we suffer a significant yield loss for it. So therefore, when I have too much potassium, via the fact that I don't get enough magnesium, I have induced a phosphorus deficiency. Isn't that interesting? Using too much of one macro ultimately reduces the amount of another macro going into the plant. We know that phosphorus in high levels will favor moly uptake. So if we're short on phosphorus, we may have a problem getting the adequate amount of moly into the plant. Guys, I go through all of this. I'm not going to go through all the interactions. I'm not going to go through all of the different things that we can say or do or yell or scream at. But here's the thing. We know it's never wrong to do the right thing. And the fact of the matter is, there is a better way to do this. As we travel and we do these field days, and we've had the pleasure of doing several. You know, we were in Erie, Illinois. We've been in Greencastle, Indiana. The team's been in Oshkosh. They've been in Castalia, Iowa. They've been in Mississippi. They've been in Middletown, Missouri. We've been a lot of places, and we love doing what we're doing, but it's always the same. It's always consistent. When we put on the right nutrients, the plant is healthier. We started doing test plots with our own products in 1993. And as we've done those over the last 33 growing seasons, the thing that we've learned is that where we have the check or the control, in other words, we would go out and we would try starter, and we would take starter, we would add this micronutrient, we would add that micronutrient, and every third or fourth replication, we would leave a check. All it had was nitrogen. Where do you think the bugs, if there was going to be any kind of insect pressure, where do you think they went first? They always went to the checks. Why is that? Because the law of nature is the weak get attacked. If we were going to have any kind of fungus problem, if we were going to have some kind of a deal where we needed a fungicide, where do you think it hit first? Where do you think it hit the worst? always where we had just nitrogen. Healthy plants are healthy plants, and healthy plants fight off other things. Am I sitting here saying that you're not going to need to use a fungicide? Absolutely not. We droned on fungicide on our own corn because we know that it works and we know that it helps. But we know this. I know that when I get sick or when I have an accident, I can go to the doctor and I can get medicine or I can get surgery and I can get better. But we also know that if I am in good shape and I have been eating a proper diet and I've been taking the supplements that I should take, even if I get sick, I get well faster. Even if I have surgery, I heal quicker. Even if I have an injury, it's less severe. And so the fact of the matter is, whether we're talking about humans or plants or cows or pigs, the right diet is always important. And guys, as we launch off into 26 here, and you guys are getting ready to get into that combine. Some of you down south already are, I know that. And as you launch off and you're sitting in that combine and you're trying to decide what it is that you're going to do in 2026, I am respectfully asking you to consider an alternative. I am respectfully asking you to say maybe just a blow and go with NP and K, even if I'm doing the best I can, even if I'm variable rating, even if I'm doing all of that, but maybe there is something else. Why? Because that plant has 17 essential nutrients. And contrary to what everybody says, it doesn't just remove 3. It doesn't only remove NP and K. We're seeing people gravitate. The industry's coming around saying, well, you probably ought to look at your boron. Well, you probably ought to look at your sulfur. Well, we do know that pH is important, although there are people who still want to ignore calcium. And I would submit to you that I would encourage people who have been hammered by this pollination problem, who had those tassels that wrapped up too tight, I'd tissue test. I want to know what nutrients are deficient in that plant. Because do I think the environment had a lot to do with it? Yep. Do I think hybrids had a lot to do with it? Yep. Do I think the fact that possibly calcium, we know that when we don't get adequate calcium, that tassel stays wrapped up. And for whatever reason, maybe we didn't get adequate calcium into that plant. We know that boron is important for pollination and having adequate pollen. We know that boron's important for having adequate silk. And if we're going to get adequate pollination, those are things we're going to have. And if we're short on boron, maybe, just maybe, if we had addressed those things, it would have been less severe. Would it have not happened? I have no way of knowing that, and I don't even really believe that. But do I think it would have been less severe and the yields would have been vastly improved? Yes, I do. And we've got people pulling tissue tests right now where they're finding this and saying, ooh, let's take a look at this and say, what can we do? Guys, we are passionate about what we do. We don't, in the last 7 days, I've driven 2,100 miles. I've done 3 field days, 2 trainings, and went to see a good friend of mine who was not well. And we don't do this for the entertainment value. When I sat down with Tyler last night, had a great field day. Big shout out to Tyler down there. And I was just explaining to him when I was over in Greencastle, I was talking to Zach and Lizzie that the fact of the matter is, guys, we show up and we don't care if there's 2 people or 200. We don't care what happens, as long as we help our people who are hosting and we help a farmer or 2 or 22 while we're there. Why is that? Because that's our whole deal. We don't believe that God put us on this earth to make a living. We believe that God put us on this earth to make a difference. And if you're interested in how that difference might impact you, we'd like to see you reach out. As a matter of fact, Karen just sent me a text here, and she wanted me to share with you on Thursday the 28th at 8:30 p.m. Central Time. We are hosting a webinar on how to survive fertilizer prices next season. Guys, we know we got a horrible spread here. Corn's too low, prices are too high. So here's the deal. If you'd like to join us on that webinar of how to survive fertilizer prices next season, drop a text to 641-919-5570. All you need to text is webinar, the one word, text webinar to 641-919-5570. Guys, we look forward to doing the webinar. We have 2 tremendous farmers who are going to be sharing with us, who can talk to you about the alternatives that they've done and the differences that they've made. And they've been doing it for several years. We have an individual going to be on there who's been in manufacturing fertilizer literally since the day he could walk. He's a third generation man who's running the family business, and he knows this stuff inside and out. And I'm so excited to have him take part in this webinar. And so it's going to be a tremendous amount of knowledge, and it's going to give you something to think about. I just invite you to tune in. I don't know if it's for you. I don't know if it's not, but here's what I do know. I've never had too much knowledge. I've never been in a position where I didn't learn about something and say, man, I'm glad I didn't learn that, because the fact of the matter is this year, as we launch off into 26, we've got to figure out how we're going to do this better. And that's where we come in, and that's what we want to help. Guys, thank you for tuning in, but feel free to reach out to us. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you have a blessed and safe fall, and we really do hope you're having a better day.